The following program may contain coarse language, violence, nudity, mature subject matter, or scenes which may not be suitable for all viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome back to the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell, coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. If you would like to send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, Xzone Radio TV. And we're coming to you tonight on the Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, X Zone Broadcast Network, and on channel 32, or is it 34? I think it's 32 on Simul TV. We used to be channel 54. Now we've moved up the chain, so now we're channel 32. If you'd, like I said, if you'd like to send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. Have you looked up in the sky lately? Yeah, there's birds, there's the sun. At night, there's the moon. Have you seen any Chinese balloons lately? Well, apparently, the government is now saying that the first Chinese balloon that was, the first part of this month was, in fact, gathering intelligence for the Chinese government. However, the three other balloons, one that was shot down over Alaska, one that was shot down over the Yukon, and one that was shot down over Lake Michigan, apparently were not from China. Well, where were they from? Do we know anything more about that? When it comes to things that are in the sky that are unknown, there's only one person that I know that knows more than any other person. He's an author. He's a former Army officer. He flew helicopter during the Vietnam War. And of course, I'm talking about my good friend, Kevin Randle. Hey, Kevin, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing fine. How are you, Rob?
Good. Kevin, what do you make about all these balloons in the air? I mean, besides all the hot air that goes with them.
Well, I had said originally that the original excuse for not shooting down the spy balloon was just absolutely ridiculous because they were afraid it would fall and injure people. I'm thinking, you're knocking down a balloon. You're going to know where it's going to fall. You can shoot it down over an open area. You don't have to wait till it gets out into the ocean as it crosses over all this important real estate in the United States. And not to belittle Canada at all, but I was thinking about the missile fields that are around a number of Air Force bases that it basically flew close enough to take a look at. And I guess it was gathering signal intelligence, which is radio signals and that sort of thing, and trying to transmit them back to China. I do not know why it took them so long to engage this thing and knock it down. And as I said, I think the excuse was absolutely ludicrous. Apparently it is a Chinese balloon. That's what the Chinese government has said. The Chinese government has admitted it was a balloon. The other three were not quite the same thing. They were smaller. They weren't at the same altitude. They didn't carry the same size of payload.
Right.
And talking about how they're not sure where they came from. They're trying to recover the debris from knocking them down. Not sure why it's taking them so long to get to the debris. I'm also not sure why they knocked them down in the places they did, because they could have knocked them down into locations that were more convenient for retrieval operations. And the whole thing just smacks of an inability to deal with this sort of thing. I wondered, getting into a conspiracy theory, I wondered if part of this labeling them as UFOs, unidentified flying objects, as opposed to UAPs, isn't a way of separating the UFO phenomena from the UAPs that they're talking about, in a way of convincing us that UFOs are just balloons and that sort of thing, and the UAPs are going to probably go the same way, where they have a terrestrial explanation. I was going to say rational, maybe terrestrial explanations for them, as opposed to an extraterrestrial. I was surprised that the general said that they hadn't ruled out alien visitation. They hadn't ruled out the extraterrestrial at first. I thought, why would you say something like that? And it gets back to the idea of the CIA-sponsored panel in 1953, where they were suggesting one way to deal with the information is to present something that is mysterious at the beginning, and we don't know what it is, and then solve the mystery. And once the mystery is solved, people lose interest in it. Although I can think of any number of things where the mystery has been well solved, and we're still very interested in it. Not mention any names, but Bermuda Triangle. But the point simply is, I can see that it's a way of kind of manipulating the information flow and a way of directing people's opinions away from an alien explanation towards something that's more mundane, more terrestrial.
You know, when it comes to the first balloon, when it was hovering and staying in place over Malmstrom Air Force Base, to me that was a red flag. Hello, these people are right over this missile field, 130 nuclear weapons down there, and nobody's doing a damn thing about it. All right, it was high in the sky. They were saying it's about 60,000 feet. But the other three were in between 40,000 and 20,000 feet and posed a threat to commercial aviation.
I would say an alleged threat. And this gave them the excuse for knocking them down. I'm not sure why they used missiles either. I would think a 50 caliber machine gun on a jet would be able to do a very good job of poking holes in it and letting the balloon come down.
Well, actually, they tried that with a Canadian balloon going back 25 years ago, and the bullets just went right through it, and the balloon stayed up in the air and ended up over Russia.
That's a good place for it.
Yeah, I agree. Why wouldn't they use something like the Skyhook?
I don't understand how they made the decisions and how they allowed a Chinese spy balloon to, as you said, over Malmstrom Air Force Base, but it also went over Francis E. Warren Air Force Base in Cheyenne, which also has a huge missile field. So we allowed this balloon to track over that. I was thinking that with satellites, you can pretty much see everything you want to see on the ground. There's really no reason to send a balloon over to gather that information photographically. But if you're looking for radio signals, well, that's a whole different kettle of fish. So I think that might be part of what they were doing was gathering signal intelligence. What are we talking about? How do we gather this kind of information and pass it on? So I just don't understand the whole thing. The idea that, well, they were at 20,000 feet or 40,000 feet, so they were a hazard to aerial navigation. But weather balloons are up all the time. They launch them from around, I would imagine they launch them in Canada and Mexico and South America. They launch them all the time to gather weather data, and it doesn't present a hazard to aerial navigation because they're small enough, and I guess they're easier to see for some reason. I don't understand the whole thing. The other thing I wanted to say is the idea, when I was doing a lot of research into some UFO sightings that dealt with radar, what I learned was the military radars are set to discriminate. They don't display everything they detect if it doesn't fall within certain parameters. If it's too slow, if it's too low, if it's too fast, it's not displayed on the radar screen. So when they say, well, we didn't have anything on radar, that's because of the way the radar, the algorithm for the radars is set. But the other side of that coin is also that you can change those parameters. You've got the visual operations going on, and I just don't understand why it took them so long to detect it. And there's talk about so many balloons having been flown over North America that haven't been detected or were detected and the information didn't make it up the chain of command. So there's a lot of things that need to be answered here about that. I was also going to say, the other thing I was going to say is our stealth technology kind of rendered the radar argument moot because, you know, we can build an aircraft that has a very small radar signature so that it's very difficult for them to detect.
I understand that there were also records found that these balloons were also seen over America during the Trump administration, and nothing was done about it.
Well, President Trump said that he knew nothing about it, and I think this was something that was dealt at a lower command level. It's just a balloon, who cares? And I think that's part of it. But they went back and they were looking at some of the older data they had, and they determined, well, this must have been a balloon or one of these kind of balloons. And I also wondered about the command responsibility. How far down the chain does the ability to detect these things and to ignore them exist? You know, they look at it and say, well, it's just a balloon. We don't have to worry about it. And that doesn't get communicated up the chain of command. The reason this the first balloon, the Chinese balloon, got communicated up the chain of command is because I guess somebody spotted it. News media spotted it in over Montana, and they got concerned about it. That kind of blew it up into a story. Well, what's going on here? What's this all about?
China is claiming that the United States frequently sends over intelligence balloons over China. No, I think this is just a push because they've actually been caught with one of their balloons over the United States. But why, with all the technology we have today, would balloons be so necessary?
Well, that's another good question. I don't have an idea why they would have to do that, because I think the satellite technology that is available would be able to do that sort of thing. And of course, being much higher, would have a wider area that they could cover that way. I don't understand why they would be using a balloon to do this sort of thing, especially if it gets caught. I will also acknowledge, if the United States has sent balloons over China, who cares? I mean, it's everybody spies on everybody else. I imagine we're probably spying on Canada. So
that's all right. We're spying on you too.
Yeah, well, there you go. I know that at one point in developing our intelligence apparatus, the attitude was that gentlemen do not read other gentlemen's mail.
Ooh.
It's an excuse for not engaging in intelligence work. But, that's kind of I suppose a nice way of looking at things. But you need to gather that intelligence because you have to be aware of what our competitors in the world are doing, or your competitors in the world are doing. And
Sure.
I think everybody's doing it. So that's no big deal. And the fact that the Chinese are now saying, well, they've sent balloons over China, probably, maybe, I don't know. But the point is, it never has come out until this point. And I know the Chinese are outraged that we knocked the balloon out of the sky. And I'm thinking, well, it was over the continental United States. What do you expect?
It's fair game. As soon as it enters
absolutely.
American or Canadian airspace, what do you expect us to do? Say, whoa, look at that. I don't think so. Yeah, Kevin, stand by. We've got to take our break. Exonation. Kevin Randle is our guest. www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. We'll both be back shortly. Don't go away. And Kevin Randle's my guest this hour. kevinrandle.blogspot.com. Kevin, what is this balloon mania doing as far as the UFO community is concerned?
Well, obviously, we're watching it very carefully and been studying the reactions of the government to it. I look at it from that point of view, being in the UFO community. What does that mean to our research, and what it reveals to us in the way of the abilities of the government to gather data from various sources? And it suggests to me that we have an inability to gather certain data. And we also have an inability to get that data up the chain of command to an arena in which it'll be of some value. But as I said earlier, I think I look at it as a way of separating the UFO phenomenon from the UAP phenomenon. And so they can belittle the UFOs to get us not interested in that anymore. And then suddenly we have the UAPs, and that's all terrestrially based. And now we have no UFO mystery, no extraterrestrial component to it, without having to explain some of the sightings that are virtually inexplicable under today's technology, which is not to say sometime in the future we won't figure out exactly.
Right.
Well, I just wonder if we're not attempting to separate the two phenomenon from one another, and we can belittle the UFOs and deal with the UAPs. And once we solve that mystery of the UAPs, then the whole thing is solved. It's a way of dividing, I guess, our attention and eliminating what they see as a potential problem.
In your opinion, is there a connection between what we've seen over the past couple of weeks and what the United States Navy came across with the Tic Tacs?
That's what I'm thinking too, that some of this is going to be explainable by balloons and that sort of thing, sort of the surveillance of our military exercises and our military capabilities. And I wondered about that. And it seems that in some of the documentation released recently, and I mean in the last few days or a couple of weeks, that they've changed the attitude. Well, we had 144 events and we were only able to solve one, but now it seems that they've solved a whole bunch more, and it comes down to drone surveillance and balloon surveillance and other terrestrial explanations. So they're kind of working that way around, and I'm wondering how it is that they didn't know that before. I mean, when one of the Navy videos came out that showed the pyramid-shaped object,
Right.
paragraph-shaped object, a pyramid-shaped object, there was a guy who posted a video on YouTube, and he had hooked on his cell phone camera up to night vision goggles and pointed it at the sky and got the same kind of image, suggesting a technological glitch in the video of the pyramid-shaped object. In other words, there was a terrestrial explanation. It had nothing to do with an object in the sky. It had to do with some kind of electrical miscommunication, I guess is the best way to put it. And no one seemed to pay much attention to that. I think that they're saying that the initial films that were released, the initial videos that were released, are now explainable in the same kind of way, that there was some kind of technological glitch and the pilot wasn't seeing things outside the aircraft, but was seeing it on the heads-up display, which should be an electrical device, kind of like a TV. You know, you're seeing it on TV, and if you look outside, what you see outside is somewhat different. So I think they're moving in that direction. I don't know why it's taking them so long to get there. I guess suppose the other thing is, when it all first broke, the attitude was, we don't care. And Congress mandated, well, we want to know what's going on. And they said, well, we'll give you something in 180 days. We'll get something out in 6 months. And as the time came near, they hadn't done anything. And then they realized that there was an interest in this report that they had promised. And they threw the thing together, and we got that ludicrous 18-page report that was like a bad high school report, telling us absolutely nothing. And that's the way it's been all along. We get absolutely nothing from the government on what they're finding, even though they claim great transparency. They seem to be looking away from, I don't want to say the experts, but I mean people like me in the field, the UFO field, that could give them a good historical perspective, which I think you kind of need if you're going to study this sort of thing. Not just come on to us, well, the UFO phenomena began in 2004 with the first of the videos taken, or the first of the sightings reported. We need to look at the entire history of the UFO phenomena and see what's going on. When you, at least in my case, when it was working on my PhD dissertation, one of the first things you do is you do a literature research. You look at what's been published before. You design, well, I want to do an investigation of this aspect of a phenomenon or a scientific experiment in this arena, and you look to see what's gone on before. So you're not duplicating the effort. You're building on that. And if you find out it's been done before, then you modify your study, or you modify where you're going to go. And it seems to me that the government is looking at it and says, we don't care what went on before. We're going to start all over again. It's kind of like I always said is Twining 2.0, Twining be the general who ordered the initial investigation that began as Project Sign and eventually evolved into Project Blue Book. I mean, now we're at that point again. Well, we're going to design a project to investigate this stuff, but we're not getting any information out. And when you look back into the 1947, when Twining proposed this, and the beginning of Sign in 1948, it was the same thing. You got no information out, and that seems to be where we're going today. It's just another way of dividing our attention. And I don't know what spurred this. I was going to say, I don't know what spurred it, but I guess what spurred this was the release of those videos, and they were kind of caught with their hand in the cookie jar. It's a nice way of putting it.
Is it possible that those videos were released because they knew that sometime later down the road, we were going to be faced with the problem we're being faced now with those three that were shot down, that there is no connection to China so far, or any other country so far, that they would have to come up with some excuse?
I'm not sure that it was because they were looking to explain away balloons, but I'm thinking explaining away the UFO phenomena as a whole. I look back to the mid-1990s when there were a number of us investigating the Roswell case, and the Air Force's best move was to ignore us. And yet we forced them into a point of view where they decided they had to investigate and look and produce some kind of a document, which ultimately resulted in the Project Bogle explanation, which I cannot believe the news media now buys as the legitimate explanation, regardless of what the facts are behind that. But they successfully diverted attention away from the Roswell case and UFOs for a time being. And then it exploded back in 2017 with Leslie Kean's article in the New York Times. And this happens periodically. We get that sort of thing periodically. We can look at 1947, 1952, 1957, the late 60s, 67, 68, 73. These things come back. They're cyclic in nature. And then they're put on the spot to try to explain them. And that, I think, is what triggered what's going on today, plus the congressional interest. But then you have the congressmen and women quizzing the experts from the Pentagon, and they asked him about the Maelstrom case from 1967, where the one missile flight was shut down by some outside force. And one of the congressmen asked about that, and the two experts said, "Well, we don't know anything about that." One of them then admitted later on, "Well, yeah, I've heard of that." But the point simply is, here's something that was very important. It was a matter of national security. It doesn't matter what the source of the shutdown was, whether it was extraterrestrial or some kind of terrestrial mistake. A whole missile flight was shut down from the outside, which supposedly was impossible. You could not do that, and yet it happened.
But is it up? Like, should the public know that certain things happen? Where does the line of national security fall into play where it's none of the public's business?
Well, I would say troop movements, for example. When you're engaged in a combat environment, what the plans are and that sort of thing. What are you developing in the way of new military aircraft? Those all are legitimate secrets, but things that affect all of us shouldn't be relegated to a handful of people, bureaucrats, who jobs transcend administrations. You get a new president in, and he appoints the Secretary of State and all the cabinet members, but the people who are around in Washington, bureaucrats in the very high level, they're not subject to that kind of removal. They stay there forever, and they can control this sort of thing. So I'm thinking that part of it is protecting the turf. Part of it is when you say national security, part of it is just them protecting their turf, because there's things that are not critical to national security. The Maelstrom Air Force Base shutdown was critical to national security. You can understand that.
Definitely.
That's something that's good. But what do you know about UFOs? Why is that a matter of national security? Why can't you tell us what's really going on? And we can point to document after document that we've been able to access through freedom of information and the like that suggests everything is not as it's supposed to be. In 1967, when the University of Colorado and Dr. Edward Condon accepted the Air Force proposal to study UFOs, there was a communication that went from an Air Force officer to one of the members of the Condon committee saying, here's what we want you to find. There's no national security implication. Well, that was untrue. They wanted to say some positive things about the way the Air Force is conducting the investigation, and there was nothing of scientific value that could be learned from further investigation. And lo and behold, when you get to 1969, they say, well, there's no matter of national security. There's no reason to continue the investigation, and there's nothing of scientific value to be learned. But the Air Force did a good job. Well, that shows you the duplicity of what was going on in the UFO research. Now, it may have been just a few people with a skewed view of what should be done and what should be said. But the real point is that was a put-up job. It was not a scientific investigation. It was a job to do specific things, and it conducted that. In fact, Condon, and he was quoted in newspapers 18 months before the final report. He said he was in Corning, New York, I think it was. And he said, I'm just really not a fan of this UFO stuff, and I'm not supposed to come to conclusions for another 18 months, but there's really nothing here. There's nothing to look at. And you can take a look at that at the Condon Committee. I published it, and I published the quotes in a number of books with the source material. So you can look at the newspaper and say, did he really say that? And he really did. And so you've got a guy, the scientific leader, the University of Colorado study saying there's nothing to it. I'm not supposed to find that yet. I'll find that later on. Now, I understand from a scientific point of view that when you go into research, you sometimes have a bias. You sometimes think you know what you're going to find, and sometimes you're surprised by the findings. But you're obligated in the scientific arena to publish the scientific data as it is revealed, as opposed to what you want it to say. And in the look at the UFOs, you can see that they are publishing what they want it to be as opposed to what it really is.
Are the sightings and the shooting down of these objects, is this going to hurt the UFO community? Because a lot of people are saying, oh, we knew they were nuts all the time. It's just balloons.
I don't think so. I think that who's going to be hurt is the government by the way they've handled this to this point, which is not the best way to have handled it. First, we're not going to shoot the thing down. We're going to let it transit the entire United States because we don't want the balloon to fall on somebody. And the next thing you know, they're shooting them down all over the place, which would be the Yukon in Canada and Alaska, and I guess one of the
Lake
Great
Michigan, yeah. All right, stand by, Kevin, or was it Lake Huron? One of the two. We're going to be back after this short break. Kevin Randle's my guest, kevinrandle.blogspot.com. I'm Rob McConnell. This is the X Zone. Don't go away. Welcome back. Kevin Randle's my guest, www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. Kevin, there are those within the community that claim to be ufologists who are saying that what the United States government did, as well as the Canadian government, by shooting down these unknown targets, is putting us on the brink of an alien war.
An alien war?
Yeah, because there are many within the community, the ufology, who believe that these are still spacecraft, that they are in fact UFOs from another planet, another universe, another galaxy, another dimension. Have your pick. And that by shooting them down, we are risking an interstellar war with these aliens.
I think the greater risk is terrestrially based. By shooting down these sorts of things. I worry about somebody accidentally shooting down an airliner or something like that could trigger us getting into some kind of real hot war, as opposed to where we are today.
Yeah.
There seem to be any number of leaders in the world who are moving in that direction. And I think we all can figure out who they are based on the rhetoric that we've heard over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
I think that's the real concern, not that aliens have traveled through interstellar distances and now are investigating our society using balloons. I would think they would find a technology that was a little bit better than a balloon to investigate the Earth. I just can't believe that there's anything to that sort of thing, that we're looking toward an interstellar war. And of course, if there was an interstellar war, we'd probably lose, because all they have to do is stand out in space and throw rocks at us. It's an old scientific joke. The old scientific joke, you just push asteroids toward the Earth. You don't have to do anything else. So how are we going to counter that? We just had one hit the ground just the other day. There was the one in Russia that caused all that damage. Think about 100 of those or 1,000 of those just being thrown. And how do we respond to that without being able to get to them? We don't have the capability to get to them, especially if they're far enough and deep enough in space. So it's just a ludicrous whole proposition. And I think that the way we need to look at that from the UFO community's point of view is look how they've handled this situation. What does it tell us about how they've handled similar situations in the past? Not meaning shooting down balloons, but the UFO phenomena. How they handled it in the past, and it's somewhat similar to this, where they have no real clue as to what's going on in the beginning, and they're just throwing out explanations, they're throwing out information, and then suddenly everything gets very quiet and very silent, and we no longer have the transparency that we had. That was the way the UFO phenomenon evolved in the mid-1940s.
Well, what happens if they do know what is going on? What happens if they do have the information and they believe that it's none of our business, that it should be maintained under national security as not to let our our
Competitors.
enemies know that we know? Is it possible that the UFO community is actually themselves causing more problems than they are causing any good by trying to force the information to be exposed to the public?
I think at one point you've got to take a look at the consequences.
Mhm.
I don't see any national security implications in this balloon stuff. I see the national security implications in the hiding of the data. I am a believer that yes, there are secrets that have to be held, and there's attitudes that must be held, especially when you're engaging in combat operations to protect the lives of your soldiers. But once we're in a civilian world, we're talking about things that I don't see a national security implication. If there is one, then yes, they must hide that from us if there is a national security implication. But it seems to me in this case, what they're doing is just bungling the job and trying to hide behind the facade of national security. But I mean, look at the way they handled the Chinese balloon. It was just completely inept. And they have all kinds of excuses for it. I can't believe the reporter said, you're going to shoot down a balloon, you're afraid it's going to fall on somebody, so you're not going to shoot it down? What kind of logic is that? And then the next thing you know, they're shooting them down willy-nilly. Not worried about that sort of thing. Granted, they shot one down in Alaska, which is not heavily populated, and I suppose Yukon is not heavily populated. Right. And they shot one down over a Great Lake, which, what are the odds you're going to injure anybody in those scenarios?
Yeah.
But I just cannot see that there is a national security component to this, especially the way they've handled it, and especially the way that it's already out there anyway. It's not like we've discovered they shot down the balloon. It was broadcast on the news. Once the balloon was sighted, it was news for days.
Yeah. How close are we to what people like Stephen Bass are calling disclosure?
I don't think we're very close at all. I think disclosure is more or less up to the aliens. And looking at it from the point of view of an intelligence officer, I know that what we had to do as an intelligence officer, if something was classified and somebody quizzed us on it, was deny knowledge of it. I was serving at Richards Gebaur Air Force Base in Kansas City as an intelligence officer and got a call from a reporter from the Kansas City Star, I think it was. And I had just read a bunch of classified documents dealing with an event in the other hemisphere. And he was quizzing me on it. And I said, well, I just don't know anything about that. I knew everything about it. And the problem was it was classified information. I was not qualified to release it. So I just denied it. He said, well, you're just the dumbest intelligence officer I ever met. And I'm thinking, no, I've actually got you on the run there. I'm not going to confirm it, because the next thing you know, you're going to see in the Kansas City Star, intelligence officer Richard Gebaur confirmed this information.
Right.
So there are arenas where you have to do that sort of thing. And it doesn't matter what the other guy knows. He can release what he wants. You have to maintain the silence. I think that's the same way we are with the UFO phenomenon. They, at the very highest levels of our government, may know exactly what's going on. And let's say it's alien visitation, and they know this for a fact. But they deny that repeatedly. They've been denying it for 75 years. And everybody says, well, but the aliens could just land and tell us about it. I says, yeah, they sure could, but they haven't yet. And I'm not going to give you that information until that we come to that bridge. We're going to just deny everything. And I think that's where we are. So I don't think disclosure is very close. And I think we've taken steps back from it, especially with the way the things have gone since the disclosure of the TikTok videos and those sorts of things. I think we've moved away from that. At that point, when it first came out, it says, well, maybe we're moving toward disclosure. They want us to get this information. The next thing you know, well, maybe we're not getting there. We've taken steps back. I don't think disclosure is very close at all.
One of the pilots that did the interception with the unknown object in Alaska said that the object actually interfered with the jet's electronics.
Well, in ufology, we have a great number of cases like that where the close approach of a UFO, whatever that UFO may be, has interfered with electronics. I think Len Stringfield, who I think people in the UFO community knows who Len Stringfield was. He tells the story that as he was flying from Iwo Jima into Japan, right at the end of the Second World War, after the Japanese had surrendered, he was going to Japan from Iwo Jima, and 3 objects approached the aircraft and caused the engines to begin to sputter and fluctuate. And the pilot said, prepare to ditch. And then the UFOs moved away and the engines began to work properly. We can cite literally hundreds of cases like that where the UFOs interacted with the environment, causing some kind of electrical interference. So that's not unusual in relationship to UFOs. But there are other things that might cause that as well, and that we have to understand. We've got to look at all those causes before we determine that is legitimately an extraterrestrial problem. But it also might mean that somebody has developed a way of interfering with the electronics on an aircraft. The Japanese during the Second World War were experimenting with electromagnetic effects to try to jam the electronics of their enemy, which would have been us, and they were successful up to about 10 feet. But it took a really powerful magnet to do it, and the logistics of creating that magnetic field were such that it just could not be developed into a weapon by the technology that existed at that time. But there is a history of trying to develop that sort of weapon systems. And that might be part of what's going on as well, to see what our intercept capabilities are, and if there is a way of jamming the electronics. And then that becomes an issue of national security. If they're able to jam the electronics of our fighter aircraft, then we need to keep that secret until we find the countermeasure.
Is there anything new within the world of ufology? Any recent sightings besides the ones that we've talked about?
Well, there's always sightings going on, but the problem now is there's so much junk in the atmosphere. I've seen, I don't know how many reports of people reporting strings of lights in the sky, and these are the Starlink satellites, and they haven't gotten a lot of publicity, but we get a lot of sightings like that. And photographs are really neat, and photographs of the launch of the SpaceX rockets as well, and create some very interesting and dynamic photographs, and people don't understand what they are. But once again, I think we're at the point where there's an awful lot of misinformation, misidentification of things that are new and different. And then we've got to deal with the electronics of the cell phones and things like that can introduce glitches. I investigated a case a number of years ago where somebody was videoing a UFO, and it said it had like a Batman symbol on it. And they said it was a 2 bright dark spots at the top and one at the bottom, and they kind of said it like Batman. It had nothing really to do with Batman. And it turned out what they had done was attempt to focus their video camera on basically Venus, and by putting it its maximum ability, but maximum power, what they had created is an internal look at one of the apertures or some part of the lensing function of the camera that created this image around the point of light they were trying to photograph. And then the real key was, they said, well, we didn't see it disappear. It just kind of faded away as the sun came up. And she said, that sounds an awful like it. But the point simply is, there's an awful lot of sightings going on. There's an awful lot of video. It takes a lot of time to get it. There's periodically interesting sightings, but not the kind of robust sightings we used to get. It's, the lights in the sky type thing. We're back to that. We get very few landing cases. The abduction phenomenon has kind of faded away. We don't get much in the way of electromagnetic cases anymore. It's something that the late Carl Flock and I discussed a number of years ago before he passed away, was that it's like the UFOs all took their spacecraft and went home. They were here to study us. They gathered as much data as they could. Now they're back home analyzing that data, and they'll return when they have more questions to ask. We just don't get the really good, robust sightings that we used to get, which is not to say there aren't sightings, there aren't interesting ones, but the real focus seems to be on some of the really great sightings from the past. whether it's the Levelland sightings from 1957 or the Washington Nationals from 1952, or what was going on in the 1960s, Michigan, for example, in 1966. The Bentwaters case from 1980, and then the Cash Landrum case from 1980. We had the Chicago Air thing that came about, 2008, but those are kind of the exceptions to the rule. We just don't get the kind of sightings we used to.
It seems as our technology improved, UFO sightings decreased. Credible ones.
Well, I think the thing was, our technology allows us to identify some of the things that in the past were mysterious to us, and that's part of the problem. Part of it is most people are much more sophisticated than they were, and they understand what's in the sky around them. But we still get reports of Venus landing on the countryside and that sort of thing. Yeah. But we have to look at cases with multiple chains of evidence, which means that, well, we just don't have a witness. We have a witness and maybe a photograph and a radar track and maybe landing traces. We have like multiple chains of evidence we can investigate and see if one of those chains gives us a clue as to what was seen. And I think the investigations by the civilian community have become somewhat more sophisticated as well. Yes, we still get a lot of self-styled investigators who really don't know what they're doing, but we have a lot of people who understand that you've got to kind of go down every path and call it where the evidence takes you. So you take a look at a lot of the sightings and say, well, like I said, well, it faded away as the sun came up. Yeah, that would be Venus probably, as Venus set and that sort of thing. So you have to look at all of those sorts of things. But
are we any closer than we were 75 years ago to understanding or putting some reason behind the UFO phenomenon?
We're moving in that direction, and I think part of it's in the sophistication of the investigations. But we haven't had to deal with the government interference. And we can see that in the Air Force regulations, for example. If you have a UFO sighting in which you know the solution, then the local Air Force base was authorized to release that information. If they had no solution, then they had to direct their inquiries to the Office of Information, Secretary of Air Force Office of Information. So they kind of kept that hidden. As I go back through some of the case files with Project Blue Book, there's some 12,000 cases. And of those, they say, well, there was only 703 or 702 that we weren't able to solve. But some of the solutions simply do not work. I did a quick survey, and 4,000 of the cases are labeled as insufficient data for a scientific analysis. Well, that's not a solution. No. That's a dodge. And so you've got around half the cases that weren't explained. Now, when we go back and we look at that and gather additional data, we sometimes come up with an explanation. Well, that's really, this is the explanation for it. But we have to take a look at all of that sort of thing. And the other problem is you were fighting the government, whose stated mission in any number of documents you read in the Project Blue Book files was to deny everything and explain everything regardless of it. There's letters that say, well, a possible explanation becomes a probable explanation. A probable explanation becomes the explanation. You go back and you look at it and say, that simply doesn't work. That cannot be. The guy was looking in the wrong direction for it to be Venus, for example, something like that. So it's a problem with dealing with the government interference with the investigations and their desire to keep the information under wraps, the incompetence of both the professional Air Force investigators and the UFO investigators not understanding what they're looking at and what they're trying to do, having two completely different missions, the Air Force to explain and the UFO investigator to come up with a sighting that is inexplicable in terrestrial terms. So we've got to look at all of that stuff and how that is come into play and keeping this thing under wraps for this last 75 years.
Kevin, as always, whenever you're with us, time goes by so fast, my friend. I want to thank you very much for joining us. And X Zone Nation, if you'd like to find out more about Kevin, if you'd like to buy any of his great books, visit his website, kevinrandle.blogspot.com. Kevin, take care of yourself, my friend, and please give my best to Deb.
I certainly will. Thank you, Rob.
Good night, Kevin. And X Zone Nation, I'll be back tomorrow night at 10 o'clock as once again we cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X Zone. So until tomorrow night, I'd like to thank my studio producer, Craig West. Also, my program director, Mac Alexander, and my senior executive producer, my wife and best friend, Laura Rogers. So until tomorrow night, my friend, always remember to keep your eyes to the sky and your heart to the light. Good night now.